Josh, you don't think more analytical people have a role in this space? Love hearing your perspective, like your outlook after the Tony fight, but people like Luke Thomas also provide really valuable insight and a very educated fan perspective. What's the point in fighting that?
No. Here's the thing, Riley Ford. I'm not fighting the fact that, look, everyone's entitled to their opinion. Everyone, even like they've watched enough. You know, like let's say like Ariel, let's say Luke Thomas, let's say other media sources. They've watched enough MMA. They know the sport. They know it, but they've never been in there. And do they train? Do they train at a high level to understand really what's going on? The pressure of what the fighter's feeling, the pressure of being on bottom, being smothered when you're exhausted, the pressure of having your back to the fence and somebody touching you, not putting a lot of effort out like a Nick Diaz style, just touching you and touching you. There's nothing you can do. You saw a little bit of that tonight with Rodriguez and Dern. Like she was getting touched and like Dern had no answers. She was just turning flustered, like hands down, just turning right into punches. That's my point, is that I'm not denying that. Like, look, they're gonna write their comments, they're gonna write their stories, and they do a great job. Okay, and I know that there's been a lot of stuff going on with Ariel and all this other stuff, especially with Brendan and a little bit with myself the other day. I look at it as fun, man. Like I could give two shits. Like. But it's funny, I was just watching Dave Chappelle the other day. He's like, fuck Twitter. He's like, Twitter ain't real life. It's like, so that when people start getting into this, like, oh, you got burned, or you did this or this. Bro, when I get off Twitter, my life still goes on. Like people take Twitter too seriously. So everything else goes on the same thing. These writers, okay, guys like Luke, brilliant. Luke is probably somebody that Luke is someone, when you listen to his breakdowns, he's got a lot of very good, insightful things. But Luke cannot tell you what the fighter is thinking in that moment. Luke cannot tell you what the fighter potentially could have done next to make that fight change. Luke, not just Luke, neither can Ariel. They cannot tell you those things. And because they don't have that fighter perspective. And I'm not knocking them. I mean, they chose a different lifestyle than a lot of us did, in terms of in this field. Okay, that's not what I'm trying to get at. But my point is that you can't say some of the journalists, some of the people, like MMA media is a lot of the times they were fans first, and now all of a sudden decided to start writing stuff, and then they treat it as if like it's gold, and it's not. And that's like they don't understand the perspective of where a fighter is coming from when they miss weight. I think it's frustrating. I think with the Aspen Ladd situation, when she missed weight, it's frustrating. But the one thing that I've learned over the years is that females, just when their period comes, there's not a damn thing they can do about making the weight. They go from, okay, I'm only 1 pound over. All of a sudden now I'm feeling bloated and carrying water and holding water, and I'm like 2 pounds over. When I went to bed last night, I was a pound over. And so that's what makes the difference. Those are maybe perspectives I like that I've years and years of, talking with female fighters, training with female fighters, coaching female fighters, and having this happen. But those guys have never done that. They've never coached a female fighter. They've never had really one-on-one tight conversations with them about those type of situations. And I think that they both do a good job. Ariel does a good job. Ariel understands one thing. He knows how to get underneath people's skin to create a funny situation. He doesn't, like when he gets off, because I was talking to DC when all this stuff the other night went down between Ariel and I. DC's texting me, he's like, bro, he's like, just leave him alone. He just really just gets on there, and he's like, he's like one of those guys. He can murder people on there, but Twitter's not real life. That's the biggest thing. Like, it's not a real place. And so when you get on there, like DC was having this conversation, like he gets off and he's like, he goes back to his normal life. He doesn't take anything that people say offensive. He doesn't care. And when he does care, he brings it up. And when I had brought it up the other day with him about it all, is that he was talking about someone being like upset, or he was talking about people talking about him. And my comment was like, he really kind of is, he got triggered a little bit because he has talked about it quite a bit as of lately, and that's not kind of like the Ariel that I know. And everyone's like, oh, he's sticking up for himself. I get it. I understand. But I'm going to give you guys the flip side on this situation. Okay. In that comment, in that last tweet that he had wrote a video Okay. And this is kind of a reason why I kind of chimed in a little bit, was he had posted a video of him with Brendan doing an interview. And Brendan said something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm just like nervous, like to do the interview." Well, you have to remember at that time, Ariel was kind of like ordained by Dana in terms of like, hey, he's the guy that you're going to do the interview with after. And that's considered like to be a big thing. Now you have a fighter like Brendan. It doesn't matter any fighter. You guys got to put this in perspective. Let's just put Brendan out of it. Let's just say it was Conor McGregor. Use a name like Conor. Conor comes out and he's like, after his win, say one of his first wins in the UFC, after he comes out and he says, hey, he comes out and he does an interview with Ariel. He's like, yeah, it's like, okay, this is new. This is new to me. I'm a little nervous. And just remember, he just exhausted himself. Maybe it was a 3-round fight. Maybe it was a hard-fought fight. He's exhausted. His mind's not really all there. And so when I saw the tweet the other day from Ariel, I was like thinking to myself, like, that's a little kind of like, if you guys have words back and forth, that's okay. I understand, like, whatever. I don't care. Like, first off, I don't care about your guys' drama, but I thought that was a little bit, I thought it was a little over the top when he pulled up the interview and put that little thing there. Because what happens is now you have a press guy, even if it's not Ariel, any other press guy. And that's the thing. People need to understand, I'm not talking about just Ariel. I'm talking about Ariel in this situation, but I'm talking about every other press guy. It could be any other person that does interviews. Okay. Let's just say, I'm going to throw Megan Levy out there. She does a phenomenal job, but let's say Megan was to use a clip from an interview to embarrass a fighter that they had interviewed from before. Now, any other fighter, right? If you guys have watched that clip and you guys turn, like, say, a year down the road or when you're retired and that's being used against you in a moment of weakness in terms of like, you just got done fighting, you're exhausted, you come and you talk, it just seemed like a little unprofessional. I get the banter back and forth. I love the whole, hey, come at me, Hilwani, the nose, all of that stuff, everything. People call him the nose. I get it. That's all fun. I think, like, you want to come at me, come get me. I got this for you. I thought that shit was entertaining as fuck. Okay. But when you take clips like that and you put them out, Ariel went to school to be a journalist. And that was like kind of one of those, like, all right, now you just kind of lowered your level to, if you said Brennan's doing that, then you lowered your level to wherever it is that he was at then, if that's what you're saying. And so that's kind of like, I think that comment. Now, my comments about owning the show. And he's like, oh, well, you work for Bellator. Yeah, I do work for Bellator. But Ariel, we weren't talking about Bellator. We were talking about our podcast. You were talking about I think it's called the Helwani Hour. Is that what it's called? Or the MMA Hour? MMA Hour. Okay. I don't believe that you own that show. Like, if you leave, the MMA Hour stays there. And if with us we were talking about shows, we weren't talking about working for Bellator and you working for ESPN. We weren't talking about that. We were just talking about strictly the show. And that was it. That was the comment that I made in our last show with Big John and I. And that was it. I said, like, the only difference is that, yeah, when we're doing this show, I don't work for anyone. Dave works for me and John and I work together in terms of the two of us on this show. And that was all that was said. There was nothing bad about it. Ariel, I think, is one of the only guys that actually has a journalism degree, I believe, that covers MMA. I mean, I'm sure there's other guys now that I don't follow as much, but Ariel's one of the first guys in the sport that I think actually had a journalism degree and covered the sport itself. And so in terms of what he does a good job, man. He's good at what he does. That was what the conversation was about. So that's separate from what I was talking with him. He, like I said, he just seemed like he got a little upset with the Brendan thing, and it's carried on. And I thought it was funny, but when that clip of him doing the interview with Brendan got posted, now that just tells other fighters that later on down the road, you could potentially be, if you don't say something, if you dislike something he says and you comment on it, he could potentially pull up old clips of you being interviewed by him and use it against you. That to me was unprofessional. The rest of it, I could care less. This is fun entertainment. It's Twitter, and Twitter's not real life. That's the thing. Twitter's not a real place. It's not real life. So I know I kind of went off on that as well, but to talk more about with Riley Ford, there is space in there for everyone, because it says at the bottom, he says, what's the point in fighting that? Like, everyone's perspective is, Luke Thomas is absolutely phenomenal. I love his show, Morning Combat, with him and Brian Campbell. They do a wonderful job. We started our podcast, I believe, or our shows around the same time, and then he started probably a couple months earlier than us. They're phenomenal, man. They do a great job. I love his perspective on things, but like I think you said this in this comment, love hearing your perspective, like your outlook after the Tony fight. But people like Luke Thomas also provide really valuable insight. That's absolutely true. They provide it though from a different perspective, in terms of more of a fan perspective, more of a journalist perspective. And I'm not knocking them for that. I just don't like when it turns into, and I'm not saying Luke does this, when it turns into, he should have done that, or that they know what the fighter should have done, or it turns into that position. And I don't like that position coming from anyone, because I honestly, like, from the very beginning, I've always stood up for the fighter. I've always been that guy. I will be that guy. Sure, I work for Bellator in terms of, doing analyst work, but I still, to this day, I have conversations with some of the top brats at Bellator. I even still have conversations with some of the guys that work for the UFC, and they talk about certain fighters. I'm like, look, this fighter has this, and this potential. All I do is speak highly of every fighter when it comes to talking to guys like someone like a Scott Coker or a Rich Chow or a Mike Kogan or whoever else works for Bellator, or anyone inside the UFC. I'm not going to name names because I don't want them to get fired. But you know what I mean? So like, anytime you talk to any of them in the UFC, it's just about making sure that they understand they have tons of talented fighters. And when you see the gold in someone, stick up for them. Make them feel like, make whoever you're talking to in that organization, make them feel like, look, if you guys want to groom this person can be really good. Give them a fight or two to get them on the right track that works tailor-made for them. If they don't grit it out and get a win, then I understand the reluctancy. But then some of them, they end up rising to the occasion. Majority of them end up rising to the occasion and having a phenomenal fight, and later on even having phenomenal careers.